She handed me an orange dress. Not burnt orange. Not rust. Not terracotta. Traffic cone orange. Safety hazard orange. The kind of orange they put on construction workers so cars don't hit them. And she smiled when she handed it to me. That smile. I'd seen it my whole life. The smile that said she'd already won and she wanted me to know it. The smile that said she'd thought of everything, planned everything. And this dress, was the final detail in a plan I hadn't even realized was being made. My name is Brooke Bennett. I'm 33 years old. I'm a licensed structural engineer. I co-own a firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. I built that firm from nothing, from community college transfer credits, from 3 years of waitressing at a steakhouse, from a state university degree I paid for dollar by dollar, tip by tip, table by table. I am not a woman who falls apart easily. I deal in concrete and steel. I calculate load-bearing walls. I inspect bridges. I work in facts, things that are either structurally sound or they aren't. Things that hold weight or they collapse. And on my little sister's wedding day, the entire foundation of my family collapsed in front of 200 people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because for you to understand what happened in that ballroom, you need to understand what kind of family hands their eldest daughter a clown suit, calls it a bridesmaid dress, and tells her to stop being dramatic when she notices. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women face impossible families and walk out with their dignity still intact. If quiet justice is your kind of justice, you are absolutely in the right place. Subscribe before this story is over, because the ending is the kind of thing you'll want to send to someone. And if you've ever been pushed to the back of the frame while someone else stood in the light that belonged to you, drop a comment right now. I see you. This one's for you. Now, let me tell you about my sister Sloan. Sloan Bennett is 4 years younger than me. She's 29. She has the kind of laugh that makes people lean closer, the kind of face the camera loves, and the kind of charm that makes adults forget to ask follow-up questions. Growing up, she was the sun in our family's solar system. Everything orbited around her. Her moods, her needs, her performances, her potential. I was just there. The reliable one. The one who showed up. The one who held things together quietly while everyone else stood in the light. Sloan was marrying Daniel Whitlock. And if Sloan was the sun, the Whitlocks were an entire galaxy. Old Virginia money. The kind of family that names buildings after grandparents and keeps a land trust instead of a savings account. Daniel was decent and quiet and genuinely kind, the sort of man who opens doors and remembers names and seems honestly confused about how lucky he is. His grandmother, Margaret Whitlock, was 79 years old, silver-haired, with posture like a steel beam and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She sat in the front row at the rehearsal dinner with her hands folded over a pearl-handled cane, watching everything. The way the florist placed the flowers. The way the groomsmen laughed. The way Sloan touched Daniel's arm. I noticed her watching me once, when I was refilling my own water glass because the server had skipped our table. She held my gaze for about 3 seconds. Then she looked at Sloan. Then back at me. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too busy surviving the evening, sitting between my Aunt Renee, who kept reminding me to smile more, and a groomsman who asked me twice if I was the sister with the issues. I found out later that phrase came directly from Sloan's own description of me. I excused myself early, drove back to my hotel, sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on, and told myself tomorrow would be fine. I'd stand where they told me, smile when the camera pointed, and leave before the bouquet toss. That was the plan. She handed me an orange dress. Not burnt orange. Not rust. Not terracotta. Traffic cone orange. Safety hazard orange. The kind of orange they put on construction workers so cars don't hit them. And she smiled when she handed it to me. That smile. I'd seen it my whole life. The smile that said she'd already won and she wanted me to know it. The smile that said she'd thought of everything, planned everything. And this dress, was the final detail in a plan I hadn't even realized was being made. My name is Brooke Bennett. I'm 33 years old. I'm a licensed structural engineer. I co-own a firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. I built that firm from nothing, from community college transfer credits, from 3 years of waitressing at a steakhouse, from a state university degree I paid for dollar by dollar, tip by tip, table by table. I am not a woman who falls apart easily. I deal in concrete and steel. I calculate load-bearing walls. I inspect bridges. I work in facts, things that are either structurally sound or they aren't. Things that hold weight or they collapse. And on my little sister's wedding day, The entire foundation of my family collapsed in front of 200 people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because for you to understand what happened in that ballroom, you need to understand what kind of family hands their eldest daughter a clown suit, calls it a bridesmaid dress, and tells her to stop being dramatic when she notices. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women face impossible families and walk out with their dignity still intact. If quiet justice is your kind of justice, you are absolutely in the right place. Subscribe before this story is over, because the ending is the kind of thing you'll want to send to someone. And if you've ever been pushed to the back of the frame while someone else stood in the light that belonged to you, drop a comment right now. I see you. This one's for you. Now, let me tell you about my sister Sloan. Sloan Bennett is 4 years younger than me. She's 29. She has the kind of laugh that makes people lean closer, the kind of face the camera loves, and the kind of charm that makes adults forget to ask follow-up questions. Growing up, she was the sun in our family's solar system. Everything orbited around her. Her moods, her needs, her performances, her potential. I was just there. The reliable one. The one who showed up. The one who held things together quietly while everyone else stood in the light. Sloan was marrying Daniel Whitlock. And if Sloan was the sun, the Whitlocks were an entire galaxy. Old Virginia money. The kind of family that names buildings after grandparents and keeps a land trust instead of a savings account. Daniel was decent and quiet and genuinely kind, the sort of man who opens doors and remembers names and seems honestly confused about how lucky he is. His grandmother, Margaret Whitlock, was 79 years old, silver-haired, with posture like a steel beam and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She sat in the front row at the rehearsal dinner with her hands folded over a pearl-handled cane, watching everything. The way the florist placed the flowers. The way the groomsmen laughed. The way Sloan touched Daniel's arm. I noticed her watching me once, when I was refilling my own water glass because the server had skipped our table. She held my gaze for about 3 seconds. Then she looked at Sloan. Then back at me. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too busy surviving the evening, sitting between my Aunt Renee, who kept reminding me to smile more, and a groomsman who asked me twice if I was the sister with the issues. I found out later that phrase came directly from Sloan's own description of me. I excused myself early, drove back to my hotel, sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on, and told myself tomorrow would be fine. I'd stand where they told me, smile when the camera pointed, and leave before the bouquet toss. That was the plan. Let me tell you about my grandmother, Ruth Draper. Because this is where the real story starts, not at the wedding, but in a small bedroom with a window positioned just right so a sick woman could watch cardinals land on a branch outside. Gran raised 5 kids in a house with 1 bathroom and a garden that fed the whole block. She quilted. She baked cornbread that could make a grown man cry just from the smell of it. She was the kind of woman who made you feel seen in a world that spent most of its time looking past you. When she got sick, emphysema first, then a stroke that took her left side, I was the one who moved in. I was 28 years old. 2 years into my first engineering job. I rearranged my entire life around her medication schedule, her physical therapy appointments, her bad nights when she forgot what year it was and called out for people who had been gone for decades. 3 years. I bathed her. I read to her. I learned which cardinals she had named and which window light she preferred in the morning. I held her hand through the nights she was afraid. Sloan visited twice. Once for Thanksgiving. Once when she needed Gran to cosign a car loan. My mother came on holidays. My father called on Sundays. I was there every other day for 3 years. Gran died at 84 on a Tuesday morning with her hand in mine and the quilt she'd made for my college graduation folded across her lap. I tell you this because of something I overheard at the rehearsal dinner. Sloan was talking to one of Daniel's aunts, a thin woman in emeralds, and she was telling a story about nursing our grandmother through her final days. She used that exact phrase. Final days. Like she had been there. Like those 3 years had been hers. I only caught a fragment before Aunt Renee pulled me away. But I heard enough. Sloan was telling them Gran's story. She was telling them my story. I told myself I'd misheard. That's the thing about being the responsible one. You give people credit they haven't earned because the alternative means admitting your family is something you cannot fix. The ceremony was at 4 p.m. in the Whitlock family's private garden. Stone arch, white roses, 200 chairs on a manicured lawn. I stood at the far end of the bridal line, half a step behind the last lavender gown. So far to the edge that my left shoulder was behind the arch. From the guest's perspective, I was a smudge of orange at the margin of a lavender painting. The processional played. 7 bridesmaids glided down the aisle in synchronized elegance, same fabric, same cut, same dyed to match heels clicking on the flagstone in unison. Then me. Orange polyester catching the late afternoon sun like a hazard vest. No matching shoes because nobody had bothered to tell me the heel color. I wore the nude pumps I had packed for the drive home. The hem of the 2XL dress pulled around my ankles like a deflated hot air balloon. I saw Margaret Whitlock in the 3rd row. She was watching me, not the procession, not the other bridesmaids, not Sloan making her entrance. Me. Her expression was unreadable. Not pity. Not amusement. Something sharper. Assessment. The ceremony was beautiful. Sloan cried on cue. Daniel's voice cracked reading his vows. The guests dabbed their eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs the Whitlocks had placed on every chair. I stood at the edge and held my bouquet, which was also wrong, white hydrangeas instead of the lavender roses the other bridesmaids carried, and pressed my elbow against the shifting safety pin to keep the fabric from gaping. Nobody noticed. That was the point. After the ceremony, the photographer organized us on the garden steps for group portraits. Lavender in front, he said, arranging the 7 bridesmaids. Then he looked at me, then at his shot list. Orange, if you could step to the back row behind the groomsmen. I moved. He shot 6 frames. Actually, could you shift left? You're catching a weird reflection. I shifted. 4 more frames. Maybe just. He gestured vaguely toward the hedge. I stepped out of the frame entirely. Nobody called me back. I stood next to a boxwood topiary shaped like a perfect sphere and watched them take 32 photographs without me in a single one. I saw my mother whisper something to the photographer. He nodded. After that, he didn't try to include me again. I decided I would survive the reception, congratulate Daniel privately, and drive back to Raleigh before the dancing started. 4 hours of highway, my own bed, my own life. A clean exit. No scene. But as the last photograph was being taken, Sloan and Daniel alone under the arch, I saw one of the Whitlock cousins lean close to Margaret and whisper something. Margaret's eyes moved to Sloan. Then slowly, to me. Something shifted behind her expression. And I felt it from 50 feet away. The cocktail hour was on the East Terrace. String lights, a raw bar, a quartet playing Sinatra. I found a high table near the railing and nursed a glass of sparkling water while I watched Sloan work the Whitlock relatives like a campaign stop. Handshake, lean in, laugh, touch the arm, move on. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was standing 8 feet away when I heard her say it. I put myself through school. Sloan was talking to a silver-haired woman in a green wrap dress, Daniel's great-aunt. I would learn later. Community college first, then state. Waitressing nights. Nobody handed me anything. My hand tightened around my glass. Those were my words. That was my life. Sloan had dropped out of a private liberal arts college after 3 semesters and spent the next 2 years finding herself in Charleston on our parents' money. She had never waited a single table in her life. And the engineering work? The great-aunt asked. Structural engineering, Sloan said without blinking. Small firm stuff, but it's so rewarding to build something real. I set my glass down very carefully. Structural engineering. My degree. My firm. My 12-hour days reading blueprints and crawling under commercial buildings with a flashlight and a measuring tape. She was standing in a $5,000 wedding gown telling strangers that she was me. Daniel's lucky, the great-aunt said, impressed. To find someone so self-made. Sloan touched her collarbone. A gesture I had watched her rehearse in mirrors since she was 16. I just believe in earning your place, she said. I picked up my glass. Took a sip. Set it back down. The sparkling water had gone completely flat. I found Sloan near the dessert table 20 minutes later. I kept my voice low. Controlled. I just heard you tell Daniel's aunt you put yourself through engineering school. She picked up a macaron and studied it. So you didn't. That's my degree. That's my career. You dropped out of Belmont after 3 semesters. She turned to me with the expression she reserved for waiters who brought the wrong drink. Amused. Faintly pitying. You're imagining things. I'm not imagining things. I heard you say structural engineering. I heard you say community college first, then state. She leaned in, close enough that only I could hear her, and delivered the blow she had clearly been saving. You're standing at my wedding in a dress that doesn't fit, making accusations. Her voice got just loud enough. Do you hear yourself? Stop being dramatic. A cousin of Daniel's looked over. Sloan straightened, put on her bride's smile. and walked back to the Whitlock table like nothing had happened. I stood by the macaron tower with my arms folded across the polyester. And I understood, for the first time completely, what I was looking at. She hadn't denied it. She'd redirected. She'd used the dress she had chosen for me on purpose, to make me look unstable for noticing. That's not carelessness. That's architecture. My mother cut me off near the coat check before I could process what had just happened. She had her fundraiser committee face on. Bright eyes. Locked jaw. Whatever you said to your sister, stop. I kept my voice low. She's telling people she has my degree, Mom. She grabbed my elbow and pulled me behind a column. The Whitlocks have certain expectations. Sloan needed to present a certain picture. A self-made picture. She told them she's a structural engineer. My mother smoothed her lapel. She told them what they needed to hear. She paused. And she told them about you, too. Enough so they'd understand why you two aren't close. The air left my lungs. What did she tell them about me? That you've struggled. That you have difficulties. That the distance between you two is because of your issues, not hers. She said the word issues the way you'd say termites. Something unfortunate. Best handled quietly. Mom, I own a company. I have a professional engineering license. Nobody here needs to know that. She checked her reflection in the brass elevator panel. Behave, Brooke. This is the most important day of your sister's life. Don't be the reason it falls apart. She walked back toward the ballroom. I leaned against the column and stared at the ceiling. Ornate plaster. Hand-painted clouds. Someone's idea of heaven. My family hadn't just excluded me from the photographs. They had rewritten me entirely. I was the cover story, the troubled sister, the cautionary tale, the reason Sloan could stand in front of Daniel's family and claim a life she had never lived. The orange dress wasn't a mistake. It was a costume. Designed to make me look exactly like the version of me Sloan had described. Someone unstable, someone who didn't fit, someone no one would believe. I went back to table 14, near the kitchen door, between two empty chairs and a couple I didn't recognize who turned out to be the caterer's parents. I was halfway through my salad when Daniel sat down across from me. He had loosened his tie and had the flushed, overwhelmed expression of a man who had just legally committed to a woman in front of 200 people. Brooke, I just wanted to say thanks for being here. I know it wasn't easy for you. I set down my fork. What do you mean? Sloan told me about your situation. The estrangement. The struggles. I think it took real courage to show up today. He said it kindly. He meant it kindly. He was a good man repeating a lie he'd been fed like dinner. What exactly did she tell you? He shifted. Just that you two grew apart after your grandmother passed. That you had a hard time. That you've been finding your footing. Finding my footing. I had closed 3 contracts that month. I was finding my footing the way a redwood finds its footing, already rooted, already standing, completely unbothered by wind. She said you might be sensitive today, he added. So if the seating or anything feels off, please don't take it personally. He squeezed my hand, stood up, and walked back to the head table, where my sister sat in a cloud of white organza, laughing at something the best man said. Table 14. Orange dress. The sister with the issues. I wasn't a guest. I was a prop in someone else's production. I left the table during the salad course and walked to the coat check. I would get my jacket, find my car keys, and text Sloan a polite goodbye from the parking lot. Clean. Quiet. No ammunition for the dramatic sister narrative. The coat check was in a narrow hallway behind the reception room. Dim lights. The muffled bass of the DJ warming up. I was reaching for my jacket when a voice came from the bench near the window. You're the one who finished engineering at State, aren't you? I turned. Margaret Whitlock sat on the bench, her pearl-handled cane resting across her knees. She looked entirely comfortable, like she had been waiting. Not specifically for me, just waiting for the moment she always knew would come. I'm sorry. Structural engineering. You transferred from Wake Tech, finished at NC State, class of 2017. She said it the way you'd confirm a shipping address. Matter of fact. Precise. My pulse jumped. How do you know that? I'm 79, dear. I don't sign checks without reading the fine print. She tilted her head and studied me the way she'd studied the florist at the rehearsal. Not judging. Cataloguing. Then her eyes dropped to the orange dress. Interesting choice. It was the only one left, I said. The words came out flat and automatic. And for the first time all day, I heard how absurd they sounded spoken out loud. Margaret's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something closer to confirmation. Was it? She said. It wasn't a question. She tapped her cane twice against the tile floor, a period at the end of a very long sentence, and nodded toward the reception hall. I think you should stay for the toasts, Brooke. You'll want to be here for what comes after. She stood, adjusted her shawl, and walked back toward the ballroom at a pace that suggested she had never once been late for anything that mattered. I stood in that hallway for a long time after she left. My car keys were in my hand. My jacket was half off the hanger. Every reasonable part of me said, drive home. But Margaret's voice stayed. Precise. Unhurried. Certain. You'll want to be here for what comes after. I put the jacket back. I walked toward the reception hall. Aunt Renee intercepted me at the entrance like a linebacker who had studied the playbook. She took my elbow, not gently, and steered me back to table 14. Sit down. Stop being dramatic. That phrase. It had followed me all day like a shadow with teeth. Every time I opened my mouth to name what was happening to me, those words were already there to close it. Stop being dramatic. As if noticing cruelty is a performance. As if naming a lie out loud is some kind of theater. I sat down. I straightened the orange dress over my knees. I felt the safety pin shift against my ribs. And then, reaching under my chair for my phone to check the time, my hand closed around something that wasn't mine. Same case. Black silicone. No frills. But the lock screen showed a photo of Sloan and my mother at a spa day. Diane's phone. She had been sitting at the table next to mine before the toasts, and she must have left it when she moved toward the head table. A notification banner lit the screen. Bennett Girls Group Chat. 3 new messages. I should have put it down. I should have set it face down on the chair and pretended I never saw it. Instead, I swiped. The messages loaded. The chat went back weeks. I scrolled, and my hands stopped being steady. Renee, 3 weeks ago. What about the orange one in the clearance section? It's hideous and it's huge. Diane, perfect. She'll look like she doesn't belong, which she doesn't. Sloan, make sure the photographer knows to keep her in the back. If she's in the front, Daniel's family will wonder why she looks like that. Diane, already handled. There was more. Screenshots of what Sloan had told the Whitlock family. A narrative so complete and detailed it read like a dossier. My career, hers. My degree, hers. Gran's final days, hers. And me, rewritten as the older sister who had a breakdown after our grandmother died and had been estranged from the family ever since. One line from Sloan stopped my scrolling entirely. Told them I nursed Gran through hospice. They loved it. Margaret especially. I set the phone down on the chair, screen facing down. My hands were shaking, not with anger, with something colder and cleaner. Clarity. I had options. I could stand up and read those messages out loud to 200 people. I could pull Sloan aside and force a confession. I could forward the entire thread to Daniel and let the truth do its own demolition work. I did none of those things. Here is why. My grandmother Ruth Draper spent her last 3 years in a twin bed in my guest room, eating applesauce through a straw and watching cardinals through the window I had positioned her bed beside. Her memory. 3 years of medication schedules and physical therapy and quiet mornings watching birds, deserved better than a screaming match at a vineyard. If I made a scene, I would become exactly what Sloan had described. The dramatic sister. The unstable one. The woman in the orange dress who ruined everything. I would prove a lie by trying to disprove it. So I put Diane's phone back on the chair. I folded my hands in my lap. And I decided I would finish the toasts, and then I would leave quietly, and I would never answer another call from any of them again. I didn't need to scream. I needed to leave. And I needed to let whatever Margaret Whitlock had decided was worth staying for, happen. Here's what I only learned later about Margaret Whitlock. Before any marriage that involved the family trust, Margaret personally reviewed the union. Not with lawyers. Not with private investigators. With phone calls. With conversations. With the social network of a woman who had been a pillar of Shenandoah Valley society for 50 years. She had made 3 phone calls before this wedding. The first was to the director of the assisted living facility that had provided home health support during Gran's final year. The director remembered Brooke Bennett, the granddaughter who came every day, who brought cornbread, who slept in the chair beside the hospital bed during the last week. She did not remember anyone named Sloan. The second was simpler than a phone call. NC State posts public commencement archives online every May, full graduate names and degree programs. Margaret found the page. She found my name. Brooke Bennett, Bachelor of Science, Structural Engineering, 2017. No Sloan Bennett on any list, any year, at any university. The third call was to a woman named Janet Hubbard, a neighbor on Gran's old street, who told Margaret everything. That Sloan had visited twice in 3 years. That I had moved in and managed the medications and the hospice paperwork. That after Gran's funeral, Sloan had quietly taken the pearl earrings from Gran's dresser and never mentioned them again. Margaret didn't confront Sloan before the wedding. She told me later she wanted to see how the family behaved in public, whether the lie was Sloan's alone, or something the entire Bennett family had agreed to stage together. The orange dress answered that question. The photographer answered it again. And Diane's careful management of every frame, every seat, every word I was allowed to say, that answered it completely. By the time Margaret stood up at that reception, she already knew everything. She just needed the room to see it too. The DJ lowered the music. The maid of honor, Sloane's college friend Tara, a woman with flawless eyeliner and the energy of a sorority president, picked up the microphone. Tara's toast was polished, rehearsed. You could tell by the pauses, the way she hit each emotional beat like a metronome. She talked about Sloane's incredible journey. She talked about resilience. She talked about a woman who had put herself through school, built a career with her own 2 hands, and nursed her beloved grandmother through her final days. Every word was a brick from the house Sloan had built on top of my life. I sat at table 14 in my orange dress with my hands folded and listened to a stranger eulogize my biography and credit it to my sister. Daniel wiped his eyes. Diane beamed from the head table like a woman watching her investment pay dividends. The Whitlock relatives nodded, approving, satisfied, impressed that their Daniel had married so well. To Sloan, Tara said, raising her glass. The strongest woman I know. 200 people lifted their champagne flutes. I lifted my water glass. Across the room, Margaret Whitlock did not lift hers. She was watching me. Not Sloan. Not Tara. Not Daniel. Me. She was reading something in my face. Or maybe she was reading the absence of something. No outrage, no tears, no dramatic exit. Just a woman in the wrong-colored dress, at the wrong table, hearing her own life recited under someone else's name, and choosing not to shatter the glass in her hand. Margaret held my gaze for 3 long seconds. Then she set down her napkin, placed both hands on her cane, and began to stand. When Margaret Whitlock stood up, the entire room felt it. She was not a woman who stood without purpose. In a family where money was quiet and power was inherited, Margaret was the signature on the last page, the one that made everything official. Conversations faded. Heads turned. The DJ, who had been cueing the next song, paused with his hand on the laptop. Even Tara stepped sideways as if yielding the floor by instinct, the way you yield to a force of nature you didn't see coming. Margaret didn't approach the microphone. She didn't raise her voice. She placed one hand on her cane, gestured to a young cousin who offered his arm, and she began to walk. Not toward the head table. Not toward the dance floor. Toward the back of the room. Toward table 14. The ballroom tracked her like a compass follows north. You could hear the rustle of napkins being set down. The creak of chairs turning. The soft, collective intake of breath from 200 people who understood that Margaret Whitlock did not take walks during receptions. Sloan noticed. I watched her face change. The smile stayed, but the muscles beneath it recalibrated. She touched Daniel's arm. He looked where Margaret was heading. Then he looked at Sloan with a question forming slowly behind his eyes. Diane half rose from her chair. Renee went completely still, her champagne flute suspended halfway to her lips. And I sat in my orange dress at the back of the room and watched a 79-year-old woman in a pewter silk jacket cross a ballroom the way a verdict crosses a courtroom. Slowly, inevitably, with the full weight of what comes next already settled. Margaret reached table 14. The young cousin released her arm and stepped back. The room was silent now, the particular silence of 200 people watching something they don't fully understand but know they shouldn't miss. I started to stand. Please don't get up, Margaret said. She lowered herself into the empty chair beside me, the one that had been empty all evening because nobody wanted to sit next to the sister in the orange dress. She set her cane against the table. And then she reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were thin and cool. Her grip was precise, the way you hold something you intend to keep. The chandelier light caught the orange polyester of my dress and turned it vivid. Almost electric. For 3 hours, that dress had been a costume designed to make me disappear. Now, with Margaret Whitlock holding my hand in front of every guest, every Whitlock cousin, every carefully placed lavender bridesmaid. The dress was a spotlight. You couldn't look away. Diane got there first. She crossed the ballroom in 4 seconds, pearl buttons catching the light, her fundraiser smile deployed at full wattage. Mother Whitlock, how wonderful of you to come say hello to Brooke. This is my eldest. She's a bit shy. Keeps to herself. You know how it. Margaret looked at Diane. Just looked. She didn't speak. She didn't raise a hand. She simply turned her head, met Diane's eyes, and held them. It was the quietest act of authority I have ever witnessed in my life. Diane's sentence died in her throat. Her smile stayed, but her body stopped, one foot slightly ahead of the other, frozen mid-stride, like a woman who had walked into a glass door she hadn't seen. I wasn't finished, dear, Margaret said. Her voice was even, conversational, the kind of tone you'd use to correct a seating arrangement. But the room heard the steel underneath it, and the room went still. Renee, who had been half a step behind Diane, looked at Margaret's face and sat back down without a single word. Her champagne flute landed on the table with a small, defeated click. Margaret turned back to me, still holding my hand. Brooke, she said, I'd like to ask you something. I'd like you to answer honestly, not for me, for my grandson. I nodded. She looked at me the way Gran used to look at me when she wanted the real answer, not the polite, protective one I'd spent a lifetime giving. Did you care for your grandmother during her illness? The room leaned in. Yes, I said. 3 years. To the end. And your degree, structural engineering, NC State, that's yours. Yes. And the firm in Raleigh, co-owned with my business partner. 6 years. Margaret nodded slowly, not with surprise, with completion. The last piece clicking into place in front of witnesses. The great-aunt in the green wrap dress, the one Sloan had told about her engineering career, was staring at Sloan with the expression of someone recalculating everything she thought she knew. Daniel had turned fully in his chair. He wasn't looking at Margaret anymore. Sloan told us she built that firm, he said. Not to me. Not to Margaret. To the air between them, like a man testing whether the words sounded as wrong out loud as they did inside his head. She told us a lot of things, Margaret said quietly. Sloan stood up. The organza of her gown rustled like paper. Her face had gone tight and porcelain, the look of someone whose mask is cracking from the inside. Smile still in place. Architecture beneath it buckling. She laughed, her cocktail party laugh, bright and dismissive, designed to make the other person feel small. Okay, this is getting ridiculous, she said, smoothing her gown with both hands. Brooke has always been jealous of me. This is exactly what I warned everyone about. She can't stand that today isn't about her. She reached for Daniel's arm. Honey, let's go cut the cake. This is our day. Daniel didn't move. He was still in his chair, one hand on the armrest, the other resting on the table beside his untouched champagne. Sloan, she just said the firm is hers. She's lying. Your grandmother asked her directly. Your grandmother is confused. She's 79. The room absorbed that sentence like a sponge absorbs bleach. Silently, with visible damage. Margaret's cane tapped once against the floor. Every Whitlock in that room had just heard the bride call their family matriarch confused. And the temperature in that ballroom dropped by 10 degrees. Daniel pulled his arm back slowly, the way you pull your hand away from a stove when you realize the heat was already burning you. Did you tell my family you were a structural engineer? Sloane's smile was holding, but her breathing had changed. Faster. Shallower. The rhythm of someone whose exits are closing one by one. Daniel, this is our wedding. Can we please just... Did you tell them you took care of your grandmother? I helped. I was there. Twice. I hadn't planned to speak. The word came out on its own. Not loud. Not angry. A correction, the way you fix a decimal point in a load calculation before a building goes up. You visited twice in 3 years. The reception hall had the suspended quality of a held breath. Forks rested on plates. Napkins stayed in laps. Even the caterers had stopped moving. Sloan looked at me. For the first time all day, she looked at me with something other than rehearsed indifference. And what I saw underneath it was fear. Not the dramatic kind. The structural kind. The kind that happens when load-bearing walls start to crack and you realize the entire facade is coming down. You don't know what you're talking about, she said. But her voice was thinner now. The charm had burned away like fog in sunlight. Diane moved forward again, with full purpose this time. This is absurd. Brooke has always resented her sister's success. Mrs. Bennet. Margaret's voice cut the air like a clean blade. 2 syllables. Diane stopped. I made 3 phone calls before this wedding, Margaret continued. She had not raised her voice. She had not stood from the chair beside me. She spoke the way old money always speaks, quietly, because it doesn't need volume to be final. I spoke with the director of the care facility where Ruth Draper received home health support. I spoke with the alumni office at NC State. And I spoke with your mother's neighbor of 40 years, Janet Hubbard. She paused. The names landed like stones in still water. Specific. Verifiable. Inarguable. Diane's face lost its color, not gradually, but all at once, the way a screen goes dark when you pull the plug. Sloan took a half-step backward. Her heel caught the train of her gown. Margaret looked at Daniel. The woman in this dress is Brooke Bennet. She is a licensed structural engineer. She co-owns a firm in Raleigh. She put herself through college waiting tables. And she spent 3 years caring for her grandmother, Ruth Draper, until Ruth passed away in Brooke's guest bedroom, holding Brooke's hand. She looked at Sloan. Your bride told my family a different story. She told us she did those things. She told us her sister was estranged and troubled. She told us a great many things, Daniel. And I'm afraid none of them were true. Daniel stood. His chair scraped against the floor, the loudest sound in the room. Sloan. She didn't answer. Sloan, is any of this true? They are all lying, she whispered. All of them. They are lying. I also know about the debts, Margaret said. She said it gently, almost apologetically. The way a doctor delivers a result they wish were different. The credit cards. The personal loans. The overdraft your parents have been covering for 2 years. I know about all of it. That was the fracture point. Not the 6 words. Not the engineering degree. The debts. Because the debts were the foundation of the entire performance. The reason Sloan needed Daniel, needed the Whitlocks, needed the lavender gowns and the fabricated biography and the dramatic sister conveniently placed at the back of every photograph. Without this marriage, the debts had no exit. And now the entire room knew. Daniel took 1 step back from the head table. Just 1 step. But in a room that quiet, it landed like a sentence being handed down. You told my grandmother you were an engineer. Daniel, listen to me. You told my family you nursed your grandmother. I was trying to. What? What were you trying to do? Sloane's composure shattered, the way composure always does, not gracefully, not cinematically, but messily, with her eyes filling and her voice pitching upward and everything she'd spent months constructing coming apart in front of the people she'd constructed it for. You don't understand the pressure, she said, and now she sounded young, truly young, the way she used to sound when she was 17 and everything was already too much. You don't know what it's like to have nothing and have to pretend you have everything. To watch your sister do everything right without even trying, and to know that you can't. You just can't. Daniel said very quietly, you had a sister. You had a sister who actually did those things. And you stole her story. And you put her in that dress so nobody would believe her. Diane stepped forward, pointed at me, and delivered the line she'd been using all day like a fire extinguisher. She's poisoned you against us. This is exactly what she does. She makes everything about herself. Stop being dramatic. The word hung in the air. In front of witnesses. In front of 200 people who had just watched a grandmother expose a fraud and a mother step forward to defend it. The phrase didn't land the way Diane intended. It landed the way a confession lands, revealing not the person being accused, but the person doing the accusing. Renee sat at her table with both hands flat on the tablecloth. Motionless. Looking like a woman doing arithmetic she desperately did not want to finish. Daniel's father stood up, then sat down, then stood again. And then there was my father. Glenn Bennett had been at the head table all night. 60 years old. He had said 12 words to me all day. You look fine and don't make a fuss and your mother handles these things. He walked over to table 14. He didn't sit. He stood beside the empty chair Margaret had been using, his hands at his sides, his tie still perfectly knotted, his face doing something I had never seen it do before. He took a very long time to speak. I should have said something years ago. His voice was quiet and rough, like a man who hadn't used it for anything real in a very long time. I looked up at him. I wanted those words to be enough. I wanted them to be the beginning of something, an apology, a repair, a conversation that started in honesty. But they were just 6 words, and they were too light, too late, to carry much weight. Yeah, I said. You should have. Sloan looked around the reception hall one last time. At the lavender gowns. At the champagne and the string lights and the 5-tier cake she had spent months selecting. At 200 people who now saw exactly what she had built and exactly what it had cost. She picked up her train with both hands. She walked to the side door. She walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft, quiet click. Not a slam. Somehow that was worse. The room exhaled. Margaret released my hand. Deliberately. The way she seemed to do everything, with the sense that the gesture had served its purpose and could now be returned. You're welcome to stay, she said. Or you're welcome to go. Either way, you should know that the Whitlock family sees you clearly now. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me, dear. I protect my grandson. You just happen to be telling the truth. She stood, straightened her pewter jacket, and walked back toward the Whitlock table with the same unhurried authority she had crossed the room with 20 minutes earlier. I sat at table 14 for one more minute. The safety pin had finally given up. The fabric gaped. The orange polyester hung. I didn't reach down to fix it. I didn't tug the hem or press my elbow against the pin or try to make the dress look like something it was never meant to be. I just let it be what it was. Wrong color. Wrong size. Chosen on purpose. And I let myself be what I was. Right person. Right table. Right time. The caterer's wife leaned over. That was the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen at a wedding. I almost smiled. It was the only one left, I said quietly. She looked confused. I wasn't talking to her. I was talking to the version of myself who had believed that lie that morning. And to the version who would never believe anything like it again. I picked up my clutch. I stood up. The dress hung like a flag nobody salutes. And I walked out of that reception hall without looking back. I drove back to Raleigh that night. 4 hours of empty highway. Radio off. Windows cracked. May air pushing through. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. Somewhere around the Greensboro bypass, I pulled over, unzipped the orange dress in the back seat, pulled on the jeans and sweatshirt I had packed for the drive home, and left the dress folded on the passenger seat like a skin I had finally shed. The marriage was never finalized. The officiant never filed the license. Daniel never signed it. In the weeks that followed, from second-hand accounts I pieced together slowly, Daniel had asked Sloan a series of simple, direct questions, and Sloan's answers had unraveled faster than the lies holding them together. The debts were real. The degree was fiction. The career was fiction. And the grandmother's story was the worst fiction of all, because she had looked Daniel's family in the eye and claimed my grief as her credential. Margaret Whitlock withdrew the family's blessing and the trust gift the following Monday. Diane called me 3 days after the wedding. I let it ring. She called again the next morning. I let that ring too. Renee sent a text. This has gone too far. Call your mother. I blocked her number. Glenn sent nothing. I went back to work on Tuesday. Bridge inspection in Durham. Client meeting about a school renovation in Apex. Concrete. Steel. Load calculations. Things that are either true or they aren't. Things that hold weight or they collapse. My world was small. It was real. It held weight. 6 weeks later, Diane and Sloan walked into my office. I was reviewing soil reports when my business partner Katie knocked on my door. There are 2 women in the lobby saying they're your family. Want me to tell them you're in a meeting? I thought about it. Then I walked out and met them in the conference room with the whiteboard and the framed building permits. Diane had lost weight. Sloan's roots were showing. They sat on the same side of the table, close together, and Diane did the talking. We need your help. The Whitlocks are talking. Our reputation is based on a story you stole from me. Diane's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Sloan has bills. The apartment. The cards. If you could just speak to Margaret, explain that it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mom. You planned it. I read the group chat. That landed. Diane's hands went flat on the table. Sloan stared at the whiteboard behind my head. I'm not going to talk to Margaret, I said. I'm not going to fix this. I'm not going to make calls or cover debts or rewrite the story so it's comfortable for you. I stood up. I'm also not angry. I just don't have anything left to give you. Not because you're bad people. But because you used everything I gave, and you used it to erase me. Diane started to form a word. I watched her mouth begin it. I watched her stop. I'm not being dramatic, I said. I'm being done. I walked out. Katie held the lobby door. I never looked back. The people who hand you the ugliest dress in the room are usually the ones most afraid of how you'll look when you finally stand up straight. That's my story. 1 orange dress, 7 shades of lavender, and 6 words from a woman who simply paid attention when nobody else bothered to. If you've ever been pushed to the back of the frame while someone else stood in the light that belonged to you, this is your reminder. You don't need a microphone to tell the truth. You just need to stop shrinking. And you need to stay in the room long enough for the right person to ask the right questions out loud. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And drop a comment. Tell me, have you ever been handed the orange dress? I read every single one.